In 1937, a Soviet prison guard recorded that Stalin's Gulags held just over 1.5 million inmates. What he didn't write down was that nearly a third of them would be dead within a year, not from natural causes, but from a system designed to work them to death. Documents unsealed decades later revealed Stalin personally signed execution orders listing thousands of names at a time, often adding notes like, "not enough" in the margins. Today, we're diving into the darkest corners of the Gulag system that Soviet history books tried to erase. By 1939, the Soviet Union had achieved something no other civilization in recorded history had managed: the highest prisoner-to-citizen ratio ever documented. And the most shocking part, most ordinary Russians had absolutely no idea. What Stalin created wasn't just a prison system, it was an entire shadow nation. The infamous Gulag archipelago stretched across all 11 of the Soviet Union's time zones, a vast network containing over 30,000 separate camps and colonies. This wasn't just a collection of prisons. It functioned as a state within a state, with its own economy, administration, and even culture. The Soviet propaganda machine worked tirelessly to maintain the illusion that these were simply re-education facilities, where criminals and political dissidents could be reformed through honest labor. But internal NKVD documents tell a very different story. These papers, hidden from public view for decades, revealed something horrifying: arrest quotas that had nothing to do with actual criminal activity. Stalin's secret police, the NKVD, received monthly targets for arrests as if they were factory production quotas. Regional offices scrambled to meet these numbers, often filling entire train cars with innocent citizens. The crimes that could land you in the Gulag were absurdly minor: being late to work 3 times, telling a politically incorrect joke, or simply being related to someone already arrested. One man was sentenced to 10 years because 3 ears of corn were found in his pocket after a workday on a collective farm. The geography of the Gulag system wasn't random. It was strategic cruelty. Camps were deliberately placed in the most inhospitable regions of the Soviet Union: the frozen wastes of the Arctic Circle, the mosquito-infested swamps of Siberia, and barren steppes where winter temperatures regularly plunged below -40 degrees Fahrenheit. At Vorkuta in the Arctic Circle, prisoners mined coal in conditions so harsh that even the guards received special polar hardship pay. When new prisoners arrived at these remote locations, they often discovered there were no facilities waiting for them. In a particularly sadistic twist, many had to construct their own prisons before receiving even the most basic shelter from the brutal elements. Survivors described digging foundations in permafrost with primitive tools, their hands bleeding in the bitter cold, knowing they were building the very walls that would contain them for years to come. The economic logic driving this system was ruthlessly clear. Between 1929 and 1953, an estimated 18 million people passed through the Gulag system, providing Stalin with what amounted to a vast slave labor force for his ambitious industrialization programs. Prisoners built the White Sea-Baltic Canal, large sections of the Trans-Siberian Railway, numerous hydroelectric dams, and extracted gold, coal, and uranium from mines where free workers would never voluntarily go. While Western intelligence had some understanding of the Gulag's existence, the true scale and nature of this system remained largely hidden until Soviet archives began opening in the 1980s and 1990s. What these documents revealed stunned even seasoned historians. The Gulag was far more extensive than previously believed, a system designed not just for punishment, but for economic exploitation on an industrial scale unprecedented in human history. When those Soviet archives finally opened, historians expected to find evidence of an impersonal bureaucratic machine. Instead, they discovered something far more sinister. Unlike Hitler, who largely delegated the Holocaust's implementation, Stalin maintained an almost obsessive involvement in the Gulag's operations, personally designing systems that maximized human suffering with the clinical precision of an engineer. The most chilling evidence came in the form of execution lists, hundreds of them, bearing Stalin's distinctive blue pencil markings. On these documents containing up to 3,000 names each, Stalin would casually scrawl "for" or "against" beside people's names, determining their fate while reportedly eating dinner or watching movies. According to historian Robert Conquest, Stalin processed these death warrants with no more emotion than sorting through administrative paperwork. Former NKVD officer Alexander Orlov, who defected to the West, revealed that Stalin would often review prisoner case files during late-night meetings with his secret police chiefs. In these sessions, Stalin sometimes personally altered sentences by adding the seemingly innocuous phrase, "without the right to correspondence." This bureaucratic-sounding notation was actually a coded death sentence, instructing officials to execute the prisoner immediately, while informing their family only that they couldn't receive letters. One of Stalin's most efficient tools for mass repression was the Troika system. 3-person tribunals he personally established that could condemn citizens without trial, evidence, or even the accused being present. A typical Troika consisted of the local NKVD chief, Communist Party secretary, and state prosecutor, who routinely processed hundreds of cases daily. Declassified records from the Omsk region show one Troika sentencing 1,301 people to death in a single session, lasting just over 5 hours, averaging about 15 seconds per case. Perhaps most revealing of Stalin's methodical approach to mass murder was his creation of the limit orders system. The dictator personally approved a bureaucratic framework where regional NKVD offices received special quotas for arrests divided into 2 categories. First category, execution, and second category, imprisonment. A declassified telegram to the Belarusian NKVD chief ordered, "You are to arrest 6,000 kulaks and anti-Soviet elements, of which 2,000 are to be in the first category." When local officials met these quotas, they often requested permission to increase them, which Stalin frequently granted with a simple signature. Stalin's micromanagement extended to the economic exploitation of prisoners. His personal archives contain detailed reports on prisoner productivity from camp commanders, with handwritten notes demanding increased output, even as mortality rates soared. When informed that prisoners at the Kolyma gold mines were dying at alarming rates due to extreme conditions, Stalin reportedly wrote in the margin, "More gold at any cost." While publicly portraying himself as the benevolent father of nations, Stalin's private communications reveal a man who approached human suffering with cold calculation. In one notorious exchange with secret police chief Nikolai Yezhov during the Great Purge, Stalin complained that the pace of executions was insufficient and demanded acceleration, a directive that led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands. Behind Stalin's demands for acceleration lurked something even more sinister, a laboratory of pain where torture wasn't just permitted but perfected. The Gulag system's recently declassified training manuals reveal a horrifying truth. NKVD officers underwent formal education in what might be called the science of suffering, learning standardized techniques designed to extract maximum pain while preserving a prisoner's ability to perform forced labor. The infamous conveyor belt stood as perhaps the most psychologically devastating interrogation technique. Prisoners were forced to stand perfectly still for days, sometimes weeks, while teams of interrogators worked in rotating shifts. Sleep deprivation combined with physical exhaustion created a nightmarish scenario where the line between reality and hallucination blurred. One survivor, Eugenia Ginsberg, described the experience in her memoir, Journey into the Whirlwind. Time itself became an instrument of torture. I forgot who I was, where I was, and why they were questioning me. I would have signed anything just to make it stop. The natural environment of Siberia and the Arctic became weaponized in ways that defied conventional understanding or cruelty. In the northernmost camps, guards developed a torture called freezing punishment, where prisoners were stripped naked, doused with water, and forced into the sub-zero wilderness. The water would freeze almost instantly to their skin, creating what survivors described as ice armor that simultaneously burned and crushed. Those who survived often lost extremities to frostbite, a permanent reminder of their experience. Perhaps most devastating were the psychological tortures designed to destroy not just bodies but souls. The NKVD developed protocols specifically targeting family bonds. Wives were forced to denounce husbands, parents to condemn children. At Lefortovo prison in Moscow, interrogators would sometimes place a spouse in an adjacent cell, allowing prisoners to hear their loved ones being tortured. Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote that many prisoners considered this psychological torment infinitely worse than any physical pain they endured. The camps at Kolyma represented perhaps the most perfectly engineered death system. Prisoners assigned to the gold mines faced a deliberately impossible situation. Work quotas were calculated based on what healthy, well-fed laborers might achieve, not emaciated prisoners working in temperatures reaching -60 degrees Fahrenheit. Those failing to meet quotas saw their food rations cut by 25%, creating a death spiral. Weaker from hunger, they'd fall further behind, lose more food, and ultimately collapse. Camp administrators carefully documented this process, tracking how long different prisoner categories lasted before succumbing. While these horrors unfolded across the Gulag system, a parallel medical atrocity program operated under Laboratory X, directed by Professor Grigory Myranovsky. This facility, disguised as a medical research center, conducted systematic poison experiments on prisoners. Declassified KGB files describe how test subjects were given various toxic compounds, sometimes in food, sometimes via injection disguised as medical treatment, while doctors meticulously documented their suffering. The results were compiled into scientific reports sent directly to Lavrenti Beria, head of the NKVD and Stalin's right-hand man. What we've uncovered about the Gulag system is more than just a historical footnote. It represents one of humanity's darkest chapters. Stalin's prison empire was built on impulse, but designed as a precisely calibrated machine that transformed human misery into economic output. The legacy lives on in the collective trauma of generations of Russians who learned to avert their eyes from unmarked graves and never speak of missing relatives. If this exploration of calculated cruelty interests you, subscribe for our upcoming video examining how Soviet propaganda convinced ordinary citizens to ignore millions of their disappearing neighbors. We'll analyze the psychological techniques that transformed normal people into willing participants in a system of mass atrocity. Leave a comment about which aspects of the Gulag system you'd like us to investigate next, whether it's the children born in the camps, the surprising acts of resistance, or how some prisoners managed to document their experiences despite overwhelming surveillance.